Hello again everyone and welcome back. In this video, we'll be taking a look at just about everything that I documented throughout the month of December. Starting out on the evening of December 11th, 2025, I'd be set up at North Elizabeth, waiting on northbound manifest M544. This would be my first video on my new camera as it just came in a few days prior, meaning I'm back in business for more videography for you guys here on YouTube. 544 with its 3 DC Gevos, all in elephant style, would continue north for Cincinnati, and once the train cleared the North Elizabeth signal, it would almost immediately light up again for another northbound. This one being another manifest, M582, as they head north for Radnor Yard in Nashville. This night's 582 would have one of CSX's autonomous track geometry boxcars behind the locomotive, with its red lights beaming down on the track, making for a pretty cool sight at night. Once 582 cleared me here, my short outing would come to an end as the temperatures continued to drop and I had places to be. Just 3 days later, on the evening of December 14th, I'd be back at North Elizabeth after getting word of a southbound M543 with a flared Mack leader. This one being a little bit different from the others, as the door on the nose of the locomotive has either not been repainted or they took the door off an old SD70 that has not yet been rebuilt and put it on this one. Just 2 days later, on December 16th, I had finally found some time to go out for an entire day to test out my new camera and to see whatever I could find. I would start out just north of Cartersville at the 53.8 intermediate signal, which is pretty much the distant signal to Bowen, for southbound Chicago to Jacksonville intermodal I-195. And with the much colder temperatures up north, you can still make out some snow on the snowplow of 195's lead engine. 195 short train of double stacks would continue south, to which then I would go get some breakfast before heading up the Etowah sub to set up for southbound ethanol train B797. Now, there really wasn't anything interesting about this train, it just had CSX power, but I really wanted to see this one, as this was the first ethanol train to come down the Etowah sub in a few months, which is very surprising as most ethanol trains in this territory would take the Etowah sub. But in recent months, they've been running all the Tampa ethanol trains through Birmingham and all the Lawrenceville ethanol trains down the W&A. Here at Rydal, the small opening in front of me is almost impossible to shoot trains during the summer months, as the kudzu grows to almost 4 or 5 feet tall. But in the wintertime, when the kudzu is dormant, this is one of my go-to spots in the area, as the morning light is almost always perfect. I would then jump in the truck and race the train down to the hotel, as most rail fans in the area call it, for one more shot of B797. Later into the day, I'd come to find out that this 797 wasn't bound for Tampa or Lawrenceville. It was coming from the Iowa Interstate Railroad up in Blue Island, Illinois, down to Montgomery, Alabama. And if I had to guess, these trains are a fairly uncommon sight over here, as I would think they would just go straight down through Birmingham to Montgomery. 797's slower speed most likely meant he was going into the siding at Wyvern to presumably meet a northbound. And sure enough, once he got into the siding about a mile south of me, M542 was sitting on the main, waiting to continue their trip north. Now, this 542 had done something that I had never seen before here, as I knew he had to work, but he would pass the crossing going about 35 miles an hour, making me think that plans had changed. The train was just so short that the crew was able to get back up to speed before stopping again at the north lead switch to Wyvern about a mile north of me. .542 would begin its work at Wyvern, which I wouldn't stick around for, so I'd head north at the W&A towards Adairville. Before reaching Adairville, I heard of 2 different trains that would be meeting at Martin Marietta just south of town, but I didn't know which train would get there first, so I tested my luck and went down to the south end, where a medium approach would be lined for a northbound to enter the siding, which would turn out to be northbound empty coal train E320 headed back to Evansville, Indiana. Now, this day's E320 had apparently picked up a string of auto racks, presumably in Atlanta, and was taking them north somewhere, though I didn't know where they were going. And that would make them just under 10,000 feet long, allowing for only a few hundred feet of space between the signals for them to fit in the siding here at Martin Marietta. With E320 now out of the way and in the siding at Martin Marietta, I'd head back up to downtown Adairville to wait for the train that they would be meeting, which would be southbound Manifest M583, as everything would work out just perfect, as no more than 5 minutes after I got into town, 583 would arrive as well, with its 3 DC Gevos leading a string of mixed freight bound for Hamlet, North Carolina.
583, go ahead.
Before 583 could fully clear the switches at Martin Marietta, they had to stop with about half of their train still hanging out on the main line, as they had a possible hot bearing and they needed the crew of E320 to check it out.
5 cars up and 5 cars back. Okay, then it sounds good to me. I'll report that back to the dispatcher. Alright, just let me know when you're in the clear, alright? We ain't no rush to leave. Sarah told me to hold what I got. That's right. 503, 15, go ahead, over. Yeah, we trying to fit Martin Marietta. We got another train that's inside. They checked that 70 car. They said they didn't see nothing wrong with it. It wasn't hot. They checked 5 cars up and 5 cars back and didn't find anything, sir. Alright, copy that. Appreciate it. Come on south when you're ready. We got 32 cars to set off, most likely at 401. Just job brief for that Y122 when you get down to Cartersville, over. Alright, setting off 32 cars and then 401. Job brief for that yard job. I appreciate it. Come on south to the location. Come on south, sir. Here we go. Please, y'all have a blessed CSX day. That's right. BNSL 43271. About the 70th car. That's right.
Once the situation with 583 was figured out, E320 could continue its trip north. It would then become the time of the day where the WNA pretty much goes dead for a few hours until the late evening, so I'd head over to the NS Atlanta North District, about 15 minutes west of Adairville, to see what was going on over there. Now over on the Atlanta North District at the control point of Reeves, just south of Plainville, Georgia, it would pretty much be the exact same scenario as the WNA, as I would sit here for about 2.5 hours and see nothing, until finally NS 368 would show up as they headed north for Chattanooga. As the sun continued to set after 368's passing, I would head back towards Adairville to catch a few more trains before calling it a night. With the sun now set for the day, I had arrived back to a Christmas-themed Adairville, as a few weeks prior, lights had been lit along the tops of storefronts, throughout the trees, and along the roof of the station here in downtown. This is one of my favorite scenes along the WNA that I long for each year. And I don't know what it is, but the feeling I get being in these little towns during Christmas time is just unmatched. But anyways, the first train that I would see after arriving back in town would be southbound intermodal I-154, with a nice YN2 AC44 on point.
CSX Equipment Defect Detector. Milepost 67.62. No defects. No defects. Total axle 284. End of transmission.
Clear South Mark Marietta, I-154 out.
Once I-154 passed me here in Adairville, they would meet northbound empty grain train G438 down at Kingston, and only about 20 minutes later, 438 would be rolling into town here at track speed. This would be my last train for the night, as after this, the WNA would go dead once again for a few hours, temperatures were dropping, and it was getting late, so I decided to head on home. 3 days later, on December 19th, I'd find myself out trackside once again after getting word of a southbound loaded rail train W019 set to come down the Etowah subdivision. Now the special thing about this one was its power, being 2 SD40s, which is a rarity to see on any road train in 2025. W019's crew would go on duty at around noon at Etowah before leaving shortly after, to which then I would hit the road northbound up US 411 before pulling off at the Appalachian Regional Port to get my first shot of the W019. And just about 10 minutes after my arrival, W019 would show up as they continued south for Selma, Alabama.
XEA 367 southbound, clear Chatsworth, W019 left.
I would then begin the chase south, pulling off a few miles down the road at the small town of Crandall for another shot of W019, though unfortunately I didn't have enough time to get my tripod out and start recording, but I did get a few pictures which I'll show here. So then I would skip through Chatsworth to pull off US 76 just south of town at the community of Ramhurst to catch W019 once again as they pass behind one of the many northern Georgia farms. WO19 would then get held up at Coniston for quite a while as a grain train was entering the plant down at Ranger, to which then I would bail on WO19 and head over to the WNA side as southbound intermodal I-195 would have 1776 leading. I would beat it to Adairville, but only by about 30 seconds, to which I wasn't able to record once again. But I would see this train later into the night, which I was able to record then, which y'all will be seeing in a few minutes. After catching 195 in Adairville, I got word that WO19 still hadn't even made it to Cartersville yet, so I'd head back over to the Etowah sub to the OOC 417 milepost just north of Wyvern to set up for one more shot of him, as once he reached Cartersville, M584 would show up as well, having to work Jenna, blocking the junction for multiple hours until well after sunset. Later that evening, after finishing up some family-related things, I managed to get back out once again, now down at Elizabeth, as I'd be set up for the I-195 that I saw earlier in Adairville, as they would also sit for multiple hours north of Cartersville in the siding at Martin Marietta to wait on M584. Now at around 7:15 p.m., 195 is only about 20 miles out from their crew change point in Atlanta before a fresh crew will aboard and continue the journey south towards Jacksonville. About 15 minutes behind the I-195 would be southbound Manifest M543, and with almost all loads and about 9,000 feet of train behind them, this night's 543 would have a very tough time climbing the solid 4-mile grade between the control point of day and here. M543 would be it for me on this night, and the rest of 2025, for this area at least, as exactly a week later, I'd be headed north for another railfanning trip, which I hope to start working on very soon, and to which I'll leave you all at that. But I thank you guys for coming along with me as we explored through northern Georgia throughout the month of December. But until next time, this is Georgia Rail Productions saying so long from Marietta, Georgia along the CSX W&A subdivision.